artificial intelligence has emerged as a promising tool for climate action in cities. There are a number of use cases or applications that are being thought of, developed, piloted, and implemented across different cities, including predictive analytics of flood, early warning systems for extreme weather, mapping disaster risk and vulnerabilities in cities, heat modeling, and also AI for looking into green infrastructure and climate investments. So in many ways, there is a broad spectrum of thinking around what AI can do for us. And this spectrum of ideas range everywhere from AI is really dangerous to caution optimism and unbridled optimism as well in some cases. Now, our interest from transitions, in this topic comes not only from an academic point of view, but also from our work in PUL, which is our People's Urban Living Lab, where we work with government departments and city officials and communities to build, test, and co-create sustainability solutions in mid-sized cities in India. And in many ways, our focus is on how can AI help in building equitable urban development, promoting equitable urban development, building resilience, and building low-carbon futures in Indian cities. So with that said, I now want to turn to our panelists, particularly Topaz and Madhvi. Right? From your respective fields and experiences, I wanted to ask you, how do you see the role of AI in shaping climate action in cities broadly? In your experience, what are some of the promising solutions that you see around you that are developing? And what, if any, are some qualifiers that you would add while discussing AI's promise in this space? So maybe we'll start with Topaz.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Angelina. Really happy to be a part of this discussion. And, we're having this event during a week when devastations of floods are really being felt across South Asia. And so while it isn't uncommon during monsoon season, I think the folks here would agree with a lot of the analysis that connects this growing intensity and frequency in disasters to the impacts of climate change. I know that India has a pretty strong digital infrastructure and a vibrant startup ecosystem. And I think that's quite encouraging when we think about scaling solutions to reach these large populations and diverse cities. And so for a bit of background on my work at the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation, my role focuses a lot on finding and supporting the growth of these innovative efforts. We take an issue-first approach, so looking at how human-centered technology can be sustainably leveraged in service of a climate-related issue. And so not looking at tech for tech's sake, not looking at data for data's sake, but really looking at scalable ways to improve social outcomes. And so you asked about different applications. I think there are several that are quite promising in terms of AI's potential impact. I'll highlight two that I'm excited about today. One is on improvements in tools and open models for decision-making. Madhvi, I know you had mentioned this right at the beginning when we were chatting, and I think that's one of the biggest opportunities. It's in the availability of data and the need for the tools to translate, to manage, and to publish that information. Cities in India as well generate so much data, but so much of it is underutilized, and that's because it's in silos. It's so costly and time consuming for government officials to manually collect that data from all of the different sources and places that they exist, sometimes in incomplete forms. And so officials may have varying access to resources at a city by city level and not a lot of visibility in terms of community needs. And so understandably, it can be quite challenging to make informed decisions. One of our partners that I'm curious if you all are familiar with, Open Contracting Partnership, is actually doing a lot of interesting work in this area. The team partnered up with Civic Data Lab to focus on improving climate resiliency in districts in Assam, so northeastern India, which is, as you all know, flood prone. And so they've collaborated with Civic Data Lab and have developed a model that determines the most critical areas of the state that are in need of investment. So rating the district for flood proneness, for preparedness, and looking at losses. And then the system essentially collects and combines all of these different types of data. So procurement data, looking at weather forecasts, river levels, and information on where people live. And it takes this combined data and uses AI to figure out, which areas are most at risk of flooding and who is most vulnerable. And so as you can already, I'm sure, hear, it can be hugely important for a government official to have all of this information at their fingertips as they're trying to make decisions on how to prioritize very limited relief funds. I think it's also quite useful to have information on where to build stronger infrastructure after a disaster hits. And so thinking about protecting against future floods, future proofing. And so that's one area I'm quite excited about. The second is on optimizing systems. And if we look beyond immediate disaster response, longer term initiatives that focus on climate mitigation, which, may be less flashy, they're so critical when we think about energy demands as cities, as energy demands in cities are rising and as we're starting to see and hope for a transition to more renewable, sustainable sources. So it's promising to see how AI can be used to balance supply and demand and optimize energy distribution in real time. We have another partner doing great work in this space, and they're essentially using AI to help grid operators in Rajasthan forecast solar power generation more accurately. And this is, I think, a very good example of a complex problem that's well suited to machine learning because of the many variables involved. So you're thinking about in a monsoon season, you have to consider cloud cover, you have to consider storm frequency, and so many other factors that influence how solar energy at any given set of panels will absorb in a day. And so this means that they can better predict how much solar energy will be available, and then they can integrate that with other power sources like coal or wind, which we hope will improve the reliability of solar power and then, support India's transition to cleaner energy sources. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that, Topaz. We have been following some of the work that you've been doing with Civic Data Labs, and I'm from Assam, so it's good to also know about the work that is going on in this space in flooding. And I think the example that you shared on Rajasthan, sort of seeing how much solar energy potential is there and sort of then cross-matching it with coal. That's also an excellent example in the energy transition space. Moving on to you, Madhvi, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, so I would first of all say thank you to everyone for organizing this great webinar and for Topaz for setting the scene straight away. Very nice experiences that you shared. For me, I would like to steer this conversation a little towards Climate IQ, that we are building this new product, which will be a global scale product and freely available tool. The idea behind Climate IQ is to focus and leverage the power of AI and machine learning in specific to be able to generate large amount of data that can be used then by cities across the world. And especially in the context of Indian cities, this is something that's really helpful because what we see is a large need for funding for a lot of the climate hazard information that we need for decision making. The information for all these climate hazards depend on these physics-based models, which are very computationally expensive to run and also require a lot of technical expertise, which is hard to find. So the idea behind ML, use of ML for this was to generate this data and provide this data, especially right now for flood and heat hazard scenarios, that will be information that can be used as decision-making tools for NGOs, for local bodies, disaster management agencies across the globe. A little as to why we think that AI models and ML models are better in a way than the traditional physics-based models is when you look at traditional based physics models, they require a lot of input data. Essentially, the morphological information about land surfaces, the large weather scale patterns, differential equations, which basically govern the systems for heat and atmosphere and water. So what ML does is it's trained on these physics-based models, and it tries to learn over time the relationships, both spatial and temporal, and then it uses that learning curve to be able to generate similar sort of data for similar, morphologically similar cities. That's the way Climate IQ's tech is being designed for the ML models. And the other part of Climate IQ is that there's a dashboard capability where the dashboard with the API capabilities that allow individuals to customize their experience and integrate with existing platforms and tools. So this is especially helpful when, let's say, there's a small little town and all you have is one GIS expert that's leading all the efforts for producing the data and then just doing all of the work that goes behind the decision making. Now you have that in your hand, and then you can generate that data within seconds on the fly with this dashboard tool. So that's phase one of the project. And basically phase one is right now dealing with the cities in America and Europe. So basically the global north. But we do intend to, in phase two, onboard partners from the global south, especially India, because cities in India, as we know, is like particularly vulnerable to the climate impacts. If we just look at statistics, just the 9 biggest cities in India host about 1.1 billion people. So that's a lot. And in the coming years, it's going to grow more. So product like this is especially helpful for the big cities and the emerging cities in India, which need careful urban planning and climate resilience planning. So, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you both. I think we're off to a good start. We obviously are understand the scope and the potential that AI really has. And I want to also touch upon a point that Topaz made right at the beginning, that there is so much data that is maybe sitting in silos or that is inaccessible. And in many cases in the Indian context, there's also a lack of data provenance and in certain situations, perhaps inaccurate data as well. And I think a lot of, I think Anita would be best placed to speak to the data conversation, saying how she was the first chief data officer in India. So Anita, just over to you, right? With your extensive sort of experience in data-driven urban solutions and governance, what has been your experience with data management and data cultures in Indian cities? What are the challenges? What are the bright spots as well that you have seen? And, and I'll come to my follow-up question after that, but yes, over to you, Anita.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you, Angelina and Transitions Research, for this opportunity to be part of the panel with Topaz and Madhavi. Okay, so, talking of Indian cities, really they report a lot of data. And they've been doing that for 10, 12 years now. You can find on the Smart Cities missions portal a lot of these aggregate metrics and data being reported, right? So when I was the chief data officer, I just looked at underneath this data that is reported. That is, what are the data sources? So we find that a lot of this data is actually maintained in physical registers and files and is collated manually. So this is a challenge from an AI standpoint. Well, what is the level of automation or digitization of the systems? I'll come to that. So if you look at digitization, then most cities and towns digitize their revenue generating systems first, right? That's the obvious. So they get revenue through property tax, through building permissions. So let's talk of property tax, which is like a most common thing across all urban local bodies. And most of them have digitized these revenue generating systems. So if you look at cities like Pune and the twin city of Pimpri Chinchwad, where I'm working closely with them now, so they have a very good data set. You have the city divided into wards into mohallas or prabhags or sub wards. That's what I mean. And then you have finally the property IDs, correct? And they have beautiful GIS-based data sets that are mapped. But now this is a very important data set. You will admit that in any, when you decide to apply any AI application to a city, then a property tax data set would be a very good baseline to profile the city, right? However, the issue today, the challenge today is that this property tax data set needs to be anonymized and placed in the open domain. Because it's not anonymized, it's not placed in the open domain, and what is available in the open domain is very, very high level aggregate. So it's not useful from an AI standpoint. Yeah, that is the second challenge, I wanted to highlight that about the availability in the open domain. So one of the third things, there will be several challenges. I'm just bringing up a third area and putting it slightly in a positive way. So we talked of this data that is, manually collected and etc. And let's come to climate action related areas. So temperature, rainfall, air quality, water, biodiversity, right? Not all is within the purview of an urban local body. So these are already different institutions. The meteorology department looks at some data sets, etc. So we all understand that this is all a collection of institutes, right? So, and then, they install air quality sensors and things like that. But think about it. What can government institutions do? Let's say they could install at best, say 25 sensors over a 250 square kilometer area. I'm just saying it. These are good figures for any Indian city, which means one sensor per 10 square kilometers. So this is again an issue for good quality climate modeling. And what I feel will work is that, and this is because I have seen a number of institutions and individuals have installed weather stations, at their institutions. So I think a good way forward would be to gather data through public participation. You just need a quality control process before you can accept their data into this data grid. Shall I say climate data grid? So there are some initial efforts, of course, but this is one of the things, these are some of the challenges I wanted to bring forward. Yeah.
Thanks for that, Anlita. What you said in the end about how data collection can be also done through community participation is something that we've been also thinking a lot about. Like, we've been trying to think about how can we think of data collection as collective action, right? And how to have communities participate in this process of building solutions for climate action in their cities, right? And just to kind of follow up a little bit on, the challenges that you've raised. Now, one of the ways in which to meet these challenges is one area of sort of building capacity. And in terms of, and I was wondering, what is the general sort of capacity at an institutional level in terms of, how data is handled within different government organizations and institutions. And the other way to kind of meet this challenge is, like you said, through participatory means of community inclusion into that. But based on what you have sort of seen in terms of these data cultures that you're talking about, as well as you did mention, I think at some point when we were chatting, of implementing some sort of AI solution in this space as well. So how do you see these challenges really shaping the development of effectiveness of AI for climate in Indian cities, in the long term or over the course of next years? Because one thing is really clear, that there's also a lot to be done in terms of getting the ecosystem ready, getting multiple stakeholders onto the board, and ensuring that these, the way in which AI is built out is inclusive and works for all. But yeah, just wanted to get your thoughts on how do you see these challenges shaping the development of AI, and if any AI solutions, were piloted and implemented that you were a part of, and what challenges you saw over there as well.
Yeah. So, artificial intelligence is being used in many areas of climate action. So, for example, if you take simple case of solid waste management, then there are products when you're trying to do automatic segregation or identification of, recyclable materials, basically. Then there are, AI has been used to improve the efficiency. I think somebody already referred to that AI can be used to improve the efficiency so that more waste items get recycled and less go to the landfills. So this is one. But I think, because of what we have been working on, and it's one of the very, very active areas in climate. Today, I have chosen to talk about urban forestry. When I say urban forestry, it is basically the planning and management of urban forests. Urban forests, the forest patches that we have, the parks and gardens, the avenue plantations, etc. Right? So that's what it is. And then, so the application of artificial intelligence to different areas of urban forestry is growing very rapidly, and it is basically leading edge research today. So when we talk of these research areas, then basically one of the things that is used extensively today is the use of satellite imagery for remote inventory. So to understand the land use change, the classification of satellite images for land use change. This is one area which people have used, researchers have used very extensively, and for that matter, even cities and towns. But one interesting thing I wanted to bring up, and that is also the fact that, see, look at the situation that you have the cities of Pune and Pimpri-Chinchwad, and for that matter, a number of cities in Maharashtra, who have done a tree census, which means each and every tree has been censused. Okay, so the height, the girth, or the diameter at breast height, as they call it, and several other parameters have been recorded, right? Through a field survey. This has been done through a field survey, and that's because there's a Maharashtra Tree Act which demands for this, etc. Now here is one good data set which has been laboriously collected through a field survey. And then, this could actually feed into baselining some of the data, training some of the AI applications. And one of the things, like one other thing, this I'm talking of Pune, and I'll come back to it. But one other thing that I have seen, use of AI, and that has been for a region in Gujarat by one of a co-researcher, one of the collaborators from Bangalore. It's about identifying the spread of invasive species in the region. So AI has been used to, identify like object detection, then segmentation, and then, identifying the areas and seeing to what extent these invasive species have spread. So, like I said, that there are a number of applications, and I mean, I can talk about a bit more, possibly later, about the experiments in urban forestry which we are sort of trying to do.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'm also curious to hear based off on what Rita was saying, and also to the other panelists, please feel free to also jump in at any point, yes? But I'm also curious to know from the perspective of Climate IQ, right? From when you were building out the tool, and obviously you started out by partnering with New York as one of the partner institutions. So what was the kind of whether the nature of the challenges different, right? And how did you sort of navigate these challenges? And also in terms of your thoughts on how a tool like Climate IQ can help in urban planning and also in sort of making sure that cities are more resilient, and how can we take those lessons and apply to the global south? Now, you did give some background into Climate IQ, so I think we're all up to speed on that front. But can you talk a little bit about the challenges when it came to actually building out, or the challenges that you might all face even now in terms of actually kind of scaling up the solution or working with different stakeholders when you're going to actually take and implement, say that here, we have this tool here, and this is what we want to do with it. So how do those conversations go? So if you could shed some light on that, and I think, from the global south, from the Indian perspective, also there might be valuable lessons that one can draw from that as well.
Definitely. Very good question, very relevant question. For New York, it wasn't too difficult to onboard them as the partner because the Urban Systems Lab, we've been working with the City of New York for a long time. But essentially, when we look for city partners, what we want from them is not much. Basically, it's because they know their city the best. We would essentially want somebody who can guide us through and just say, okay, this data is there, you've developed this data, but we would want to cross-reference and just see, okay, is it good? Does it need refinement? If there's some specific local data sets that we do not know how to get, that's where city partners come in. So right now, with the second city, we onboarded Phoenix, and we basically, it's like a very soft partnership where we are all looking for if we could get some of the municipal data sets for building heights and footprints, which is again one of the crucial data sets that goes into the physics-based models. So so that's one of the part of why we do need some partners. The second goal of having partners is essentially outreach, promotion, and building this key stakeholder partnerships, which are long lasting, and then we can use, the cities can use this product in a manner which suits them and their current needs. So let me give an example. Let's say we are taking heat hazards. The definition of what is considered as heat differs by city. So let's say New York, here an emergency situation is when it's 82 Fahrenheit. That doesn't work well for Delhi. That doesn't work well for any of the Indian cities because that's like the entire summer. So you need to have some local perspective of what is actually considered as a heat emergency, or like what is considered as a flood. So all of that is resolved through having city partners and stakeholders which are actively involved in the building of the product in a way that suits them and in a way that is applicable for a global product in general, and not using the same set of statistics and measures for global north or just the US and then use them for the entire world, which doesn't work out. The other part of your question regarding the challenges is, again, because Climate IQ is a global product, it comes with its own sets of challenges because what we're building is local hazard-based information and what we're portraying is a global product. So there has to be like a way when it's sort of like a middle ground where both these aspects are fulfilled. So one example for this, when we were building out the product, is very simple, but use of units. What do we present the information as? Celsius, Fahrenheit, because there has to be one. So when we're starting with Global North, the idea that every stakeholder, every city wants is information out in Fahrenheit. That doesn't work well on a global product. So that's like some of the little challenges which might seem redundant, but are really very important in the sense that when you present information, it has to have some value. The other product challenge was, what do we present as information? What is locally relevant? So many of the communities want actual exposure data, or like, how do we just like measure how many people are vulnerable? But then again, this sort of question is very context-based, depends on city to city. So then the idea was to just limit ourselves to climate hazard. What we give is, okay, this is the amount of heat and flood hazard information that cities can then, using their own sets of thresholds, using their own sets of standards and emergency planning measures, they can adapt that information as to their own local needs. That was one of the key specific decisions that we had to make. And exactly in the context of Indian cities, again, this is the information that we would want to just present the days above a certain threshold degree for temperature and the maximum flood depth, maximum area under flood, which is just the basic information that most cities lack, or at least there's no platform where you have this accessible information. And then you can use that information accordingly, depending on which agency wants that information out there. So, yeah.
Thanks, Madhvi. I think what you said about long-term partnerships is something that really resonated with me, and also with the work that we're doing with Pull, because it's also, if people that you're working with in different institutions change and get relocated, then the whole sort of one, in some ways, sometimes you have to start all over again. Or so building that kind of intent and long-term partnership becomes really crucial in that space. And I think in terms of what solutions are, or what part of the solution is locally relevant and how do you adapt to that, so for different stakeholders is really important, right? So on that note, I also wanted to bring Topaz, I think, into this conversation to speak a little bit about the role that different institutions have in this space, right? Now, we've been working on AI and understanding AI, both from the perspective of looking at the challenges and opportunities across different sectors, and we've been doing this work for the past 7 years, actually more than 7 years. But and beyond the immediate risks, which now there is a lot of awareness and education about, stemming from inaccurate data sets or biased data or risks of privacy or differential impact, is also this larger imagination of who gets to decide the future, or who gets to decide how cities adapt, or what resilience building means for different sort of people, right? And when it comes to then looking at AI, it's not only in terms of how well does the solution work, but how well does the solution work for the people in particular context. And that's what I was also hearing a lot, in terms of what Madhvi was saying, and what you had also begun when we started talking about flood mitigation in Assam and the Rajasthan use case as well. So could you come in a little bit and tell us about the role that different public sector, nonprofit, multilateral organizations that they can play in promoting and supporting AI-driven climate resilience in cities, and how these collaborations can be strengthened, or where these collaborations need to be strengthened and structured to meet public interest?
Yeah, that's an important question and really good framing, who gets to decide what. I'll just say at the outset that because we all have a unique role to play, you can sort of even see it in the panelists represented in today's event. Because we have such a unique role to play, it's really important that organizations spend some time assessing who's doing what. So both at the institutional level and then also at the community level, and then building relationships of trust. I think that this sort of landscape mapping and identification of roles allows for deeper collaborations that actually result in impact. So nonprofits can target their efforts more effectively and sort of coordinate for scale, like leveraging different levels of expertise and resources. And then the public sector can focus on smart decision-making and create an enabling environment that sustainably supports some of the ideas that are being implemented. And so I view this ecosystem of roles around 4 key needs. The first is a need for, as has been mentioned a few times, those financial resources and the technical expertise. So you need financial resources, you need that technical expertise to support the development and the deployment of these climate AI solutions, particularly for projects that are not or may not be commercially viable, but have significant social and environmental benefits. So both the public sector and philanthropy can play an important role here as responsible stewards of capital. Second, I would say, is we need policies and guidelines that encourage the responsible and ethical use of AI in climate resiliency planning. And here I think of think tanks, like yourselves and academia and multilaterals. These are institutions that can really step in as conveners of research, conveners of discussion, to help inform and gain traction around some of the policy issues that are being implemented at a local level, at a regional level, and even at a global level. And so policymakers can then use these insights to develop the right standards for data sharing and for algorithm development and for transparency. I know that in the India context, the National Institute for Transforming India released a strategy for AI. That's one step in the right direction in terms of outlining a plan and understanding how best to leverage AI across different sectors. And then also just in terms of promoting ethical research and adoption. The third need that I think is important is also on digital literacy and on knowledge sharing. That I think we all sort of have a role to play, and organizations that can provide training and support to local governments, to communities and other stakeholders are important to help build a capacity and to allow folks to use and understand AI tools safely and effectively. That's pretty fundamental. And then just my final point there is on trust and community ownership. Madhvi talked a little bit about this in terms of Climate IQ's work and the need for local relevance. I think AI solutions have to be designed and implemented in a way that's inclusive and also that's responsive to the actual needs of local communities. So key to this are folks that are closest to the communities that are affected. I think local nonprofits play a major role here in terms of facilitating dialogue and then ensuring that those in the community have a degree of ownership. So not just that you're bringing them to the table, it's also that they have some ownership in the decisions and in the tech that's being deployed. And a lot of that requires trust between those nonprofits and the communities. But there's also a part of that we also need to think about trust between nonprofits and the government. That's also important in terms of actually scaling solutions. And so while these relationships, I think, take quite a bit of time to build, from what I've observed with our partners, they're instrumental to project success. And so you want to be able to incentivize officials to participate and add value to the project. And so you will need to cultivate goodwill and trust, which just takes time. In terms of collaboration, I've mentioned previously this issue of silos between all of these actors. And so we have data producers and we have technology developers, we have policymakers, and we have community members. And Anita, the point that you brought up about the need for digitalization is so important, just in terms of having communities involved in that process. They're able to collect and participate. I think that's key when we think about collaboration. And so bringing that data together requires collaboration at all of those levels that I mentioned. And connecting as interdisciplinary stakeholders increases the likelihood that that will happen and that the data producers are very tightly connected to tech developers, which then creates effective paths to scale for new climate tech. I think beyond traditional grant making, PGMF, we view ourselves, we try to take ownership as well in facilitating some of this collaboration, at an ecosystem level, both in terms of connecting our partners that are working in complementary areas, and also in terms of encouraging coordination of projects, looking at folks that are doing work that might be amplified if they sort of combine their resources and efforts, and then also through shared learning and joint funding initiatives. And so that's just in a nutshell some of the areas where I see there being the greatest needs and where we all fit into the effort.
Yeah, I think that was very well put, and it was laid out so beautifully. I feel like we can almost turn this into a diagram. Sorry, I don't mean to be glib, but the way you've laid out all the stakeholders, and I'm just wondering if either Madhvi or Anita would like to also add to that. And then I think for the last few minutes, 10-15 minutes, I do see some audience questions also coming in, and I saw one that's really interesting. So before we get into that, would Madhvi and Anita, would you like to also add to what Topaz had just laid out for us so beautifully?
You want to go first, Madhu?
No, you go first.
No, well, I think, I fully agree with what Topaz has actually laid out, because I'm very much trying to implement some solutions for the urban local bodies with the idea of, assisting them and then seeing how this could be scaled nationally. And then we're trying to build an element of community participation or citizen science in this, because this really involves. So, because I have some experience working on the ground, what I can say is that, yes, this is required. We are going the same direction, but the effort that is involved is far more than what someone can imagine. Okay. On the one hand, when you're dealing with stakeholders, and this is true in every country, town, and city, is that when you're running a 4 or 5 year project, you might find that the entire council team, or what we call here as the urban local body, the team might rotate, the officers might change. So, that's a real thing you have to deal with. And while in terms of citizen science, what we are trying to figure out is when you involve citizens, there can be an element of error that comes in, quality control, when you're trying to accept data from citizens and internalize it. Then quality control has to be important. And we are trying to see whether we can leverage machine learning for that. Meaning, when you have large number of people responding, then we can determine whether the data is indeed correct by applying certain, triangulation or such methods, validating it. So these are just a couple of comments, I wanted to add.
Sure. And Madhvi, do you want to?
Yeah, great points made, Anita. Just building off your conversation, I would say that yes, validation is certainly the most important aspect of any data, whether you collect it on ground, whether it's satellite, whether it's ML-based data, because unless the data that you provide is correct, there's no point of distributing the data. That's also one of the challenges with the work that we are doing. So yes, ML is able to generate data, but it requires a lot of training and a lot of input data just to learn and just to then predict. And especially with atmosphere in specific, it's so hard to be able to replicate the atmosphere with something which is just like relationships based off of the training. So yes, and that is why we do need to have the local bodies, stakeholders, NGOs, citizen scientists, whoever are there on the ground who knows their city the best, to be able to say that, yes, this data is out there, but is it good? Is it not good? We need to have some valid reference points, checks, accuracies to be able to say that, yes, you can proceed with this data. This is relevant for making decisions, because especially when you're considering climate resilience, a lot of funding needs to go in to build these systems, and you cannot just procure these finances or even implement these finances based off of data which is not accurate. So that's my little take on that.
Yeah, I think one of the things in this context also is to think about at what stage do different voices come into this process. I think, and there are specific stages within the AI life cycle, within the production of a specific tool, where different stakeholders might feel more comfortable, especially the team of developers might feel more comfortable bringing someone or bringing multiple voices at that particular stage, right? And then there might be different stages. So how far upstream also do community voices enter into the conversation? At what stage does it become a fully multi-stakeholder focused with diverse viewpoints coming into it is, I think, also very crucial. But I do want to move to the audience questions. I do see a few in the chat box and Q&A. There's one question from Neeti Sabnani, who's posed a question about climate IQ. And she says that the tool is super interesting, but it's also because AI and ML have a huge energy resource requirement for both running and cooling. It may feel like fighting iron with iron. So I think, what are your thoughts, Manvi, on this question? And I think this is becoming more and more question that's being discussed a lot, in terms of also the context of large scale foundational models, the complex resources, the data, and as well as the energy and natural resources that go into it. So curious to hear your thoughts on this question.
Yeah, definitely it's probably one of the first questions that comes up when dealing with ML. So in the context of climate IQ, I would say there needs to be a reference as to what would traditionally be the cost, both in terms of money and in terms of carbon, that if you were to run the physics-based models, the traditional models, as opposed to ML, how much would you be generating in terms of carbon and in terms of spending the costs. So just to give you an example, the model that I run is called WRF. It's the Weather Research and Forecasting Model, and it's the state-of-the-art heat model that's used by scientists across the world. And to run 100 days of simulation on this WRF model takes about 11 days in a row and costs about $4,000 just for one simulation. And we are talking about 5,000 cities, 10 such simulations for each city. So a lot of money that goes into this, a lot of time that needs to be spent on this, and definitely a lot of carbon that we would generate if we were to just base off of these models. In comparison, when you look at the ML models, all it would take is maybe a couple of minutes to be able to generate the same amount of data that it needs 11 days to simulate, and a fraction of the cost that's used with the physics-based models. So with this reference, ML, I would say, is actually good for the climate. And the same goes for the larger question of using LLM models or other AI tools out there. When you look and compare into the resources that are needed to generate the same amount of information, whether however it is done, that reference sets the idea that you are actually saving a lot of these extra finances and the credits for carbon and stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, so essentially what you're saying, it's also a question of seeing it within the overall balance of things and
Yes.
looking at it from multiple perspectives. Of course, if you just were to scrutinize the model itself, one would raise this question. But yes, I think so. There are a few questions that are, about how to take some of the smart cities climate data observatory work at NIUA forward, and some work from MOA on climate smart cities assessment. But perhaps we can, Anita, if you'd like to take these questions, we can go ahead with them. But otherwise, we can also maybe provide a written answer to the attendee on email, I think, right? So I'll just quickly glance at the other questions as well.
But the question on MOHUA and climate smart cities assessment data is not clear what the question is. It just says, yeah, there's an observatory, there's yes, but what's the question about that?
I think the question is at the third stage, at the third thing, where it says how to take this work forward. But I do feel like it's quite a big question. And
Yeah.
Vibhor, if you're still here, if you're still in the session, would you like to maybe pose it a little concretely so that we can get to your question and answer it here? Okay. And yeah, another question is on what kind of data and climate literacy needs to be built in the context of Indian cities. I think the entire panel can answer this question, although the question uses climate IQ as an example, right? But what kind of data and climate literacy need to be built in the context of Indian cities, and how can we equip city leaders to use climate insights generated with AI better? Would anyone like to take that question?
Okay, so let me try and take this. Okay, so I think you have asked a very difficult question. How can we equip city leaders to use climate insights generated with AI better? So, can we equip city leaders? You've seen examples we were discussing about. I didn't talk about a couple of projects. Yes, but whether they will use these insights better is a completely different question. Can we equip them and what they will use? Because this is a challenge which I have seen, and other researchers in other countries have also agreed. When they come across something, see, first of all, you have this urban local body and this administration. And say right now I'm with Pune Knowledge Cluster, or a transitions research. There's Goa Urban Local Body, there's transitions research, there's Pune Municipal Corporation, there's Pune Knowledge Cluster. This is a different body. Unless we are in a position to place a dedicated relationship manager at the urban local body or at the government side, we will not be able to get them to use all the good research that we may have produced. So we must understand that it's a question of control. It's a question of accountability. So when a commissioner wants to report something, be it to the state government, be it to the public, be it to the media, then they need to have somebody in their control. So control is all right. If, like, I was chief data officer deputed by Tata Trusts to Pune Municipal Corporation, but that's fine. But then I was a dedicated person out there, and then they will believe the report that I send them, and they will use it for that. So that is one. I mean, the answering that question I'm saying is that it is about sort of tightening the collaboration to an extent that they start thinking or they start building this view that when I have a challenge in area A, then this is the set of NGOs I need to talk to or researchers. When I have a challenge B, then this is the area I need to talk to. So until that, and that requires a lot of relationship building. So there's a very simple answer to it, but do you think, Angelina, you would, and anybody would like to add some more?
I think the way you phrased it is really on point. I think it comes down to building relationships and strengthening partnerships at the end of the day, because using AI for climate action, it's not a simple process in terms of just taking a tool and applying it. There's a lot of actors involved, and I think a lot of our conversation today has focused on that multiplicity. I'm looking at the time and we're at 6:30, but I just want to quickly, add and just say thank you to all our panelists and, for this insightful conversation. And also thank you to all our participants who've stayed on through the whole hour, and also who were able to join 10 minutes for 10 minutes, and who might come back and have a look at this conversation again. So thank you everyone so much. But yes, if there are any final closing remarks, I think we can just take a minute and have also the panelists give some closing remarks if you'd like to, and then we can close.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly say, in terms of explainability, one of the areas that, we can have a lot of discussion about, we obviously don't have time, but is also on making sure that the models that are built are not black boxes. And so that can just help in terms of making sure that we understand how decisions are being made and that these processes are not opaque. So transparency and explainability, I think, are very crucial when we talk about trust building. And I'll just close by saying that, as has been mentioned, it's also important to remember that AI, while it can contribute a lot to tackling climate challenges, it's not this magic solution. It's a tool, and it relies on a lot of human input, on programming, on decision-making to really function effectively. And so when we think about designing AI tools, we need to think about designing them with very careful consideration for their ethical implications and also their potential impact on communities. And so really at the core of this, human-centered approach and prioritizing the needs of the communities that are most affected. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah,
Right.
thanks for that. I think that's
I'll
that's
just
always yeah. Please, Anita, go ahead.
I just add one comment to what Topaz just said, is that in AI, it is very easy to build an algorithm and demonstrate something. But it's very, 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 very difficult to actually get it to work in multiple real world scenarios. So I think because there are a lot of students who do something and they write code, they do a project for taking notes from say meetings, and then but then for it to work, for that tool to work across all kinds of examples is very, very difficult. So you need to keep that in mind.
Yes, I think keeping the ethical challenges and considerations in mind are really important. And that's how we began this conversation, by asking what AI can do for us. I think, a lot of the thinking sometimes goes in the direction of what can AI do? And then how can we use it in XYZ directions? But it's also a question of how to make AI work for us, like Topaz is saying, from a human-centered perspective, and also in consideration with the non-human world, and considering the environmental costs and ecological challenges that come with it as well. Madhvi, were you going to say something? Otherwise, I'll be happy to.
I mean, both Anita and Topaz summarized this so beautifully. I don't think I need to add anything else, but just one liner, ML has its benefits, but you need to be careful about what goes in and what comes out. So
thank you. I think The brevity was great. So on that note, thanks everybody who stayed on, and thank you to the panelists again. We do our talks on a monthly basis, so we will be having another one on a transition, on a radical transition at the intersection of tech society and sustainability again very soon. Thank you, everybody. Have a nice evening.